I went to what was then my third Esri user conference. I was an academic in the UK, and I went to my third Esri user conference, and I met Peter Adams, who was the head of Esri Press, and Kathleen Morgan, one of his staff. And I just pitched this idea of a book on cartography. And they said, yeah, cool, that's great, let's do it. So I went back to the UK and got bogged down with bureaucracy, administration, paperwork, failing students, and all the other stuff you do as an academic. And it never happened. By 2007, I'd written a distance learning master's course with quite a lot of written content. In 2008, British Cartographic Society published this 6-inch by 4-inch, 60-page book, and I thought, well, that's nice, but I think there's a bit more to cartography than just that. And then in 2011, I moved to California, started working for the big bad GIS company. And so, I forget this is being streamed. Hello, back in Redlands. I hope to be back there soon. So I went to work at Esri, and I got chatting in with Peter and Kathleen, and we revisited the idea of the book. And of course nothing happened because I had to get on with other work. And then by 2014 I approached Kathleen again, and she said, well, if you're going to do it, you really should do it rather than stop talking about it. And we eventually got round to starting it proper in about 2015. So what is the book? What's the rationale for it? It's for people who don't have a lot of books. It's to demystify what cartography is. It's deliberately technology agnostic. It's not a traditional Esri press book. It's not about Esri technology per se. It's about making great maps, or how to make great maps. And when people say, what's the market? You have to pigeonhole, don't you? It's either an academic textbook for students of a particular age, or whatever it might be. And I said, well, it's for everyone. And that's a difficult sell. But that was the challenge. And really what I wanted to try and do is promote thinking, and to create a book that would outline what I call manners for the modern map maker. And I also wanted to put a U in colour, which was a challenge for an American publisher. But I got to do that. So it's a sage, it's a crutch, it's a guide, it's a companion, it's a friend, it's something there to help guide you. And this is where I do slightly veer from the code of conduct, because the internal working title for the book for quite some time was The Dogs, which was vulgar slang for something regarded as outstanding. If I was going to have one shot at this, one go at making the book, then I wanted to make it the best thing I could possibly make. So, we get started. I started making some mock-ups. You have to make mock-ups to persuade people this is worth backing. The idea was that it was going to be filled with topics rather than chapters. No topic was going to have maybe more than about 500 words. So subdividing cartography into chunks of 500 words was a challenge. It was difficult. Some topics got merged. When you're writing your third sentence and you think, well, that's it. There's nothing more to say. You have to fold in other stuff. Or other stuff like projections, which I probably can only write 3 sentences about anyway, but you suddenly find that actually it's a fairly large topic. So you have to split it up in sensible ways. So we started talking with some of the guys in our creative lab, some of the designers, and we started playing around with layouts. And it soon became clear that each topic was going to be a spread, an individual spread, with text on one side and illustrations on the other side. So there's a familiar structure building inside the book. But something interesting then happened. It turns out the first thing you need to do is get a cover, because without a cover you can't market the thing. So this was the first cover to the book, and if anybody knows me, I do like transit maps, so I came up with this little transit map metaphor. And I had 2 original co-authors on the project as well, hopefully blurred enough that you can't actually make out their names. But I'll come back to that. And then one of the co-authors dropped out of the project, so that's why his name's blurred out. So I was left with somebody else, and we went through different iterations of titles. Then it transpired that a different author had used the transit map metaphor for their cover, so I had to come up with another cover, and we came up with another cover, which was pretty boring. At the same time, we had to do some very serious work, like think about what font we were going to use. And one of the creative lab guys said, why don't you use Rockwell? Because, although it's usually used for short passages of text or posters, this is really what you've got. It's a book full of posters. It's a Monotype Corporation, 1934, typeface. And it's not usually used for long passages, but I like to break a few rules, so we thought, well, let's do that. But it then turned out that a decision we made 2 years ago became a problem 6 months ago when we realised that there was no diacritic for the lowercase c on Bojan Soric's surname. So we had to go out and make a special character just to get his name spelt correctly. So we're iterating, and the pattern's now established. This is pretty much the layout. We veered from it slightly by having these large plates. And part of the project is to have a series of other voices. It's not just my work. It's really a scrapbook of all I've learnt throughout my career, plus voices of other experts. And it soon became clear that not only were we going to have spreads, but we were going to alphabetize it. So it was going to go through A to Z. There, I assimilated again. And so that gave us, plates in between each letter of the alphabet. And I had external experts write a short passage of text about a great map that they loved. And I think that works quite nicely. So by late 2015, we had about 40 of these mock-up spreads in a reasonable state of production. I was getting a little concerned. And they're deliberately small, but I want you to get the sense that there's a lot of white space on some of these illustrations. And I was a little bit bothered that a big book full of white space wasn't exactly going to sell very many copies. It's a difficult sell. And things started getting a little bit awkward. But that second blurred out co-author then went off on his own route somewhere. And that meant I got to work with John Nelson. Well, John, do you want to take up the rest of the presentation? Or? Yeah, and also Wes Jones. So John and Wes became my buddies. So what's the next job? That's right, you need a cover. So we basically started the work again and came up with another cover, and we came up with the idea of putting the period after cartography because we wanted to make a statement. It was a slightly arrogant statement. We couldn't use the internal working title. I'd already been told that wasn't going to go on the cover. But the problem with that is, any of you remember this guy? You probably won't be able to hear this, but in fact, I'm not even going to play it. So this famous, there were more people at this inauguration than any other inauguration in history, period. And this was a week after we'd started publicising the book cover, and I'm thinking, really? This is going to be like the Sean Spicer of all cartography textbooks. Anyway, we went with it. I kept everything in check on a spreadsheet because how else do you do things than have lists in Excel? This actually isn't the book spreadsheet. This is a list of all my usernames and passwords, but it's so small that you'll never see it. And we ended up at the end of 2017 with about 333 topics, 189,000 words. There's a lot of illustrations. This is the breakdown of who did what, although John contests this number. You think 49? Yeah, whatever. And then we had to go around in circles with legal and credits and getting permissions. This is the trials and tribulations of forms and agreements. And it turns out that somebody sending me a tweet going, yeah, sure, you can use it, doesn't actually square with the legal requirement of a corporate entity who don't want to get sued for using something inappropriate, which I totally understand. But this became quite a long task. Let's get into some fun stuff. The pages that never were. These are pages you will not see in the book for lots of reasons. I'm glad I didn't use Tolkien's map for the fantasy maps. I instead went with Treasure Island. But this little map down here, that innocuous little map that you see there is the Death Star plans. Just a top tip, I wouldn't even bother writing to Lucasfilm or Disney to ask permission to reproduce it. You'll get a no, and when you write begging, you don't even get a reply. So that never got in the book. I wrote to Pink Floyd's management to try to use the Dark Side of the Moon cover, and although the artists said, yes, this is a great idea, but you need to square it with Pink Floyd, well, I don't have Dave Gilmour's number. I just don't have it. So that one went by the by. The people who own the copyright for the Bolman map wanted $1,000 to reproduce it, but this was one of the special maps, so I had to say to Bill Cartwright, who was doing... I said, can we perhaps use the writing, but maybe let's change the map for a cheaper version. Let's go for Anderson's 1985 version. It still axonometric, and it still has much of the same qualities. So he said yes. This map of the Hong Kong Survey and Mapping Office had to be removed because they wanted a detailed number of copies of e-books. How does that work? So we couldn't specify that we were going to sell 2,000 e-books, so we had to pull that one. I had to pull this one because Sony didn't get back to me. It's a nice map, though. I had to pull this one because T-Mobile never got back to me. I had to pull this one because the Buckminster Fuller organisation wanted a considerable amount of money, as did the rights holders for the Peters map. So I'm just giving you top tips here if you're ever going to write a book. And if you yourself have authored a contentious map, be prepared for it to be pulled from your own book. So this never got in the book. By this time, I was getting bored of getting permissions, and this page was a beautiful idea. It's 30 separate, fantastic terrain maps, but I didn't want 30 separate permissions to seek. So instead, John and I got a DEM and just rattled through 30 different representations ourselves. How much did it all cost? I'm not going to tell you. Suffice to say that some of the very, very famous maps that you would imagine might cost an awful lot of money to license were literally pence. You know, a couple of things did cost a fair amount of money to license. But if you remember back from a previous slide, only 16 out of about 100 images that were third-party actually needed any form of fee. There was an awful lot of free stuff. So we iterated, and we iterated a lot around beer, and we iterated a lot around paper maps. And look at that, I get a Firefly map in my presentation. And we talked things through. So, you know, we looked at this page and we said, yeah, it works, but let's talk it through and we improve it. We sweated over this one for quite some time. Wes Jones spent 60 hours, he claims, on this illustration. We thought it was awful, so we said no. And he had to go away and redo that one. John did this wonderful collage of zoom scales for Webb Mercator, and I said to John, zoom in on football club I support. Now what John didn't know at the time is there are 2 football grounds separated by a river. So he zoomed in on the wrong one, and I made him redo it. You can't illustrate a crossbar on a typographic component if you spell cartography with a Y, so we used the Dutch spelling. Why not? Wes had fun making the Ishihara test for colour deficiency, not least because he's colourblind, so he couldn't actually see this. He also made this fantastic illustration, and I had some fun too. We put a lot of people in the map. My dad's on this map because he died from this condition, so there's a lot of stuff in here. My terrible maps are in here. And then we get to editing, and I find out I've got a problem with the Oxford comma, but I don't want to make a mistake that was made on another book very recently. And things came down to the wire. We wanted to use this, and 3 days before we didn't get permission, so John came up with a fantastic illustration. I wanted to use this, which came in at 4 a.m. on the day the book was going to press, but it was wrong. But then I got the right one in the end. So we ended up handing off the book and getting it back, and some people said some nice things. And we're nearly at the end. A couple of reviews came in, and then my family started getting involved. My niece, that was the best one. I think the best quote that I had was this one, though. So I'd like to give Daniel... It's gone into a second print run. I just want to say a big thank you to everybody that was involved in making this. And that's pretty much the end of the line, except I do have one very, very small announcement. Stay where you are right now. But after this session, after everybody's done, you're all going to get a copy of the book for free. Okay? So... do not tweet this.
Don't tweet about it, because otherwise everybody else is going to be waiting out there to get ahead.
It's not being streamed. All right. Anyway, that's that. So afterwards, after this entire session, we'll give a copy of the book to you. But there's not enough for every attendee at NACIS, so you've got to get first dibs. All right. Thank you very much.